Someone is thinking about you in this very moment. Not in a passing, forgettable way, and not in the ordinary rhythm of daily thoughts. It is deeper than that, heavier than that. Their mind keeps circling back to you in a way that feels almost inevitable, like a tide that never fully stops returning to the same point on the shore. Even when they try to focus elsewhere, even when life demands their attention, you reappear in their inner world without effort. Yet despite this, they remain distant. No message comes, no call is made, no step is taken toward you. They stay where they are, and you are left sensing only the absence of action while completely unaware of the inner pull that never really goes away. What makes this painful is not just the distance, but the fact that the reason behind it is not what most people assume. It is not lack of feeling. It is not indifference. It is something far more complicated and hidden beneath awareness. Something that quietly shapes the way love expresses itself when it becomes too intense to handle. There is a kind of silence that feels heavier than conflict. It does not come from not caring. It comes from caring too deeply, to the point where the emotion becomes difficult to hold without breaking something inside. This is the silence of emotional overload, not emotional absence. And you may have felt it in the space between you and them. The sense that they are there, but also not there. That something alive exists between you, but refuses to turn into words. In moments like this, the absence becomes almost physical. You feel it in your body, not just your thoughts. You reach for your phone without fully expecting anything, yet something inside you insists that connection is still alive on an unseen level. And strangely, it is. Just not in the way you can access. Because for them, thinking of you does not bring only comfort. It also brings something sharper. Something that unsettles them in ways they cannot easily explain. When a person becomes emotionally significant enough, they stop being just a source of affection and start becoming a mirror. And that mirror does not only reflect the person in front of them, it reflects everything inside them that was never fully healed. Old fears resurface. Memories they buried become active again. The younger version of themselves, the one who once experienced love as something unstable or temporary, begins to reappear in their emotional reactions. In this state, closeness is no longer simple. It becomes revealing. Loving you starts to feel like being emotionally exposed to themselves. It is not just connection they are reacting to, but everything that connection awakens inside them. And so, without fully deciding it, they begin to step back. Not because the feeling is gone, but because the feeling has become too emotionally loud to stay inside of. This is where the inner conflict begins. On one side, there is genuine attachment, warmth, and longing. On the other side, there is a deeply conditioned survival response that associates emotional closeness with loss, pain, or abandonment. Many of these patterns were not created by you at all. They were formed long before you entered the picture, shaped by earlier experiences where love did not feel safe or stable. This is why their behavior can feel contradictory. One part of them moves toward you, while another part immediately retreats. It is not manipulation or games. It is an internal struggle between desire and protection, between connection and self-preservation. And in the middle of this conflict, you are left interpreting silence as meaning, filling in the gaps with your own doubts, slowly turning their distance into a reflection of your own worth. When in reality, it was never a measurement of you at all. Before anything in this connection has even reached its final shape, there is already a kind of quiet grief forming on their side. Not because something has actually ended, but because their inner world is constantly preparing for endings before beginnings are even secure. It is as if they are standing inside the future, imagining the loss of something that is still trying to arrive. And when a person lives like this emotionally, they do not move toward love with openness. They move toward it with caution, hesitation, and withdrawal. So when feelings begin to deepen, when closeness starts to feel real, their response is not to lean in. It is to become still, to retreat inward, to reduce their presence, to hold back rather than expand. From the outside, this can look like disinterest, But internally, it is something far more complicated. It is not that they do not feel, it is that they feel too much at once and do not know how to stay present inside that intensity without losing their sense of control. If you could truly see what is happening within them, the story would not feel like rejection in the way it appears on the surface. You would see the internal conflict. You would see the conversations they never express, the thoughts that never become messages, the emotional weight they carry alone. And in that understanding, what you feel might shift from confusion into something closer to sorrow, because it becomes clear that this is not a lack of attachment. It is the difficulty of holding attachment without fear collapsing in beside it. They are not only staying away from you, they are staying away from the version of themselves that becomes visible when they feel this kind of connection, because your presence does not just create feelings of love in them, it also activates everything unresolved within them. Old emotional memories, earlier experiences of loss, and the deeply learned belief that closeness eventually leads to pain all begin to surface at once. In that state, love stops feeling simple. It starts feeling revealing, and what it reveals inside them is not always something they feel ready to face. This is where psychological defense takes over. When emotional intensity rises beyond what the nervous system can comfortably hold, distance becomes a form of regulation. Pulling away is not a decision made out of clarity. It is an instinctive attempt to regain balance, a way of lowering emotional pressure when it feels too overwhelming to stay open, and so the cycle forms. They move closer, something inside them opens, then fear follows, and they step back again. Not because the feeling is gone, but because the feeling itself becomes too powerful to remain inside of. This is also where misunderstanding begins on your side. Because silence is rarely neutral. It fills itself with meaning. And when someone important becomes inconsistent or distant, the mind naturally begins searching for explanations. Often, the easiest explanation to believe is the one that turns distance into personal fault. That something about you caused it. That something about you was not enough, or too much, or simply not right in some unspoken way. But this interpretation, as convincing as it feels in moments of emotional uncertainty, is not the truth of what is actually happening. The truth is that their distance is not a measurement of your worth, it is a reflection of their capacity. Their ability to stay emotionally present when vulnerability becomes intense is still under development, shaped by experiences long before you arrived. And when that capacity is limited, even genuine love can become something they struggle to express consistently, not because it is absent, but because it is entangled with fear. This is why real change, if it ever happens, cannot come from pressure or waiting or trying to become more acceptable. It can only come from within them, through a gradual willingness to sit with discomfort instead of escaping it, to feel connection without immediately retreating from it, to recognize that what feels like danger is often just unfamiliar emotional exposure, and that not every intensity signals harm. But even that possibility, as real as it may be, cannot become something you build your life around. Because love that depends entirely on another person's internal healing process becomes a space of uncertainty rather than shared presence. And over time, living inside uncertainty reshapes you in ways you do not immediately notice. It teaches patience that turns into self-abandonment. It teaches understanding that slowly starts to override your own emotional needs. And this is where a deeper realization becomes important. You are not meant to exist in a love where you are always interpreting silence instead of receiving clarity. You are not meant to stay in a dynamic where emotional availability is conditional and inconsistent. Real connection does not require you to constantly decode it. It does not make you question your own value in order to explain its absence. So while it is true that people can grow, and people can heal, and people can eventually face what they have been avoiding for years, it is also true that you cannot build your emotional life around someone else's potential. Potential is not presence, possibility is not reciprocity, and longing, no matter how deeply felt, is not the same as being chosen. At some point, the most honest form of love is not waiting harder. It is recognizing where you are no longer being met. It is understanding that care without consistency eventually becomes emotional exhaustion. And it is allowing yourself to step out of a space where you are constantly holding meaning together on your own, because you were never meant to carry both sides of a connection alone. Your longing for love that is visible, spoken, present, and fully embodied is not something to be questioned or reduced. It is not a flaw in you. It is not emotional excess. It is not neediness disguised as desire. It is one of the most fundamental human yearnings there is, to be seen clearly, to be chosen openly, and to be held without confusion or concealment. And you are allowed to want that without apology. In fact, there is something powerful that happens when you stop shrinking that desire to make it easier for others to handle, when you no longer dilute it, excuse it, or disguise it as something smaller than it is. Clarity begins to emerge, because ambiguity can only survive where silence is tolerated as a substitute for truth. The moment you stop accepting uncertainty as a form of love, the dynamic itself is forced to reveal what it actually is. At that point, something becomes inevitable. Either the person who has been holding you at a distance feels that shift and is confronted with a choice they have been avoiding, and they step forward into clarity, presence, and responsibility, or they remain where they are. And in that remaining, something equally clear is revealed: that no decision is also a decision. That absence of movement is still a form of choice, just not one that includes you in the way you deserve to be included. And while that realization can hurt, it also ends something far more damaging than pain. It ends confusion. Because grief, when it finally arrives in its honest form, is not the destruction of love. It is the clearing of illusion. It is what happens when love is no longer tangled with waiting, guessing, interpreting, and hoping. We are often taught to see grief as proof that something failed, as though its presence means love was wasted or misplaced. But grief is not failure. It is love that has nowhere left to go. It is the emotional truth of connection continuing even after circumstances no longer support its expression. To grieve fully is not to fall apart. It is to acknowledge reality without negotiation. It is to say, this mattered, this was real, this shaped me, and I am no longer going to pretend otherwise. That kind of honesty does not weaken you. It stabilizes you. And from that stability, something new begins to form. Because this experience is not only about what you feel for someone else, it is also about what is being revealed within you. Pain, when it is faced instead of avoided, becomes a kind of teacher. Not because suffering is valuable on its own, but because it exposes where you have been stretching yourself beyond your own emotional limits, where you have been staying longer than clarity has allowed, and where you have been giving meaning to silence in order to preserve hope. In that sense, this is not only a story about distance between two people. It is also a story about the gradual return of your own emotional authority. You begin to see more clearly what love actually feels like when it is mutual, when it is expressed, when it does not require interpretation. You begin to distinguish between connection that is alive and connection that is only being imagined through longing. And even if this realization arrives through discomfort, it is still a form of awakening. There is a deeper truth running underneath all of this. You are not being shaped by what someone else cannot give you. You are being shaped by what you are no longer willing to live without. And that is a very different transformation. Because people can heal. People can change. People can reach moments where fear loosens its grip and something more honest finally takes its place. But none of that can become the foundation of your emotional life while it is still only potential. Possibility is not the same as presence, and waiting for someone's potential to become real can quietly turn into a long delay of your own life. So what remains essential is not prediction, but clarity. Clarity about what you need in order to feel emotionally safe. Clarity about what kind of love feels like connection instead of uncertainty. Clarity about how long you are willing to remain in a space where meaning has to be constantly interpreted rather than simply experienced. Because love that is healthy does not require you to decode it. It does not keep you suspended between hope and doubt. It does not make you question your worth in order to explain its distance. And none of this means what you felt was imaginary. It means it was real enough to matter, but not necessarily structured in a way that can hold you in return. And that distinction is important, because your capacity to love deeply is not the problem here. It is not something that needs to be corrected or reduced. It is something that needs to be met. And if it is not met consistently, then the responsibility shifts, not to diminish your feeling, but to protect your wholeness. So whatever unfolds from here, whether this person steps into clarity or remains in distance, one truth does not change. You are not defined by their availability. You are not measured by someone else's capacity to stay. And you are not made smaller by love that could not fully express itself in return. What you are experiencing is not evidence that you are too much or not enough. It is evidence that you are capable of depth, attachment, awareness, and emotional truth that many people never fully allow themselves to feel. That capacity is not a burden. It is a form of intelligence, and it does not disappear just because it has been met with silence in one place. It carries forward with you, into every future, into every possibility that is still forming, into every version of love that has not yet arrived. And somewhere ahead of you, not defined by urgency, not shaped by confusion, but steady and clear, there is a form of love that does not require you to interpret its absence in order to understand its presence. That is what you are moving toward now, not less love, but clearer love, not smaller love, but love that can actually stay. And in order to reach that place, something inside you begins to shift in ways that are not always obvious at first. It does not happen as a sudden realization. It happens quietly, through repetition, through experience, through the slow softening of patterns you once thought were permanent. You begin to notice that not every unanswered message deserves an emotional collapse. Not every delay in response is a reflection of your worth. Not every uncertain connection is a reflection of your value. There is a widening space inside you where interpretation begins to loosen its grip, where you no longer feel the need to build entire stories out of fragments, where silence is no longer automatically translated into rejection. This is not indifference. This is clarity, because clarity does not remove feeling, it removes distortion. And slowly, you begin to understand that the intensity you once used to chase connection was never the same thing as connection itself. Intensity can feel like love, but it is often anxiety in disguise. It is the nervous system trying to create certainty where none exists. But real love does not require that kind of effort just to be understood. Real love does not leave you constantly decoding it. Real love becomes something your body can rest inside, not something your mind has to constantly analyze. And so, as you move through this transition, something very important begins to happen. You stop confusing emotional distance with emotional meaning. You stop believing that you must earn consistency through overgiving, over-explaining, or over-understanding someone else's behavior. You begin to see that love, which requires you to abandon yourself in order to maintain it, is not the kind of love that can sustain you. And this realization does not come as a dramatic break. It comes as quiet recognition, a soft awareness that feels almost like remembering something you always knew but had temporarily forgotten. You start to feel the difference between being chosen and being tolerated, between being met and being managed, between being truly seen and being occasionally acknowledged. And once you feel that difference clearly, you cannot fully unfeel it. It becomes part of your inner language. A new emotional standard begins to form inside you, not as an expectation placed on others, but as a deeper alignment within yourself. You are no longer only asking, "Do they care about me?" You begin to ask, "Does this connection feel safe for my nervous system? Do I feel steady in this, or do I feel like I am constantly adjusting myself to keep it alive?" And these questions change everything, because they move you out of emotional survival and into emotional awareness. There will still be moments where old patterns try to return, moments where silence feels louder than it actually is, moments where you feel pulled back into interpreting, analyzing, waiting, hoping. But even in those moments, something different is now present. A small pause, a space between impulse and reaction. And in that space, You begin to choose differently. Not perfectly, but consciously. And that is how change actually takes root. Not in the absence of emotion, but in the presence of awareness within emotion. You are also beginning to understand something deeper about timing, that not everything meant for you arrives when you are emotionally desperate for it. Some things only arrive when you are no longer abandoning yourself to reach them. There is a version of you that does not chase clarity because clarity is already embodied. That version does not overthink silence. It does not negotiate with inconsistency. It does not confuse potential with presence. It simply recognizes what is real and what is not yet capable of being real in the way you need it to be. And as you move closer to that version of yourself, your experience of love begins to shift as well. You stop being pulled toward what feels uncertain just because it feels intense. You become more aware of steadiness, of consistency that does not need to be proven repeatedly, of effort that does not disappear and reappear based on emotional convenience. And at first, this may feel unfamiliar, because intensity is often what the nervous system has been conditioned to recognize as emotional significance. But slowly, steadiness begins to feel like peace instead of boredom. Consistency begins to feel like safety instead of limitation, and presence begins to feel more valuable than potential. This is where your emotional world reorganizes itself, not by forcing new beliefs, but by experiencing new standards repeatedly until they become natural. And as this happens, you begin to notice something else very important. You are no longer trying to convince yourself that you are worthy of love. You are beginning to operate from the assumption that you already are. And that changes the entire direction of your emotional energy. Because when you are no longer proving your worth, you are free to observe alignment instead of chasing validation. You are free to notice who meets you and who only meets you halfway, who stays present and who disappears when things require emotional responsibility, who builds with you and who only connects when it is convenient. And this awareness does not make you colder, it makes you clearer. It makes your emotional world less chaotic and more intentional. You begin to understand that love is not meant to feel like constant uncertainty. It is not meant to keep you in a state of waiting for the next emotional shift. It is not meant to feel like something you must hold together alone. Love, in its more grounded form, is not something you constantly interpret. It is something you experience without needing constant explanation. And that is where you are gradually heading, not into a version of yourself that feels less deeply, but into a version of yourself that no longer confuses emotional turbulence for emotional depth. Into a version of love that does not make you question your place inside it. Into a connection where presence is not intermittent but natural, where care is not conditional but consistent, where you are not left trying to decode what should have already been clear. And even now, in the in-between space you are in, something is already changing, because you are no longer the same person who believes that confusion is something you must endure in order to deserve connection. You are becoming someone who recognizes that clarity is not a luxury in love, it is the foundation of it. And slowly, without forcing it, your life begins to align with that truth, not all at once, but steadily, quietly, and in a way that finally feels like it does not require you to lose yourself in order to be loved.